tariffs are a tax on consumers, and I'm not a fan of jacking up taxes on American consumers. So my hope is these tariffs are short-lived and they serve as leverage to lower tariffs across the globe.
What President Trump is initiating here, this is a long-held belief that he believes that tariffs will correct those problems. But what's also indisputable is the markets are down about 8% in just 2 days. And I'm getting all kinds of reaction from businesses, farmers in Wisconsin that are highly concerned about what's happening. So those are the facts. So I just can't predict how this is going to turn out here. It's a bold, risky move.
When McKinley most famously put tariffs on in 1890, they lost 50% of their seats in the next election. When Hott and Smolley put on their tariff in the early 1930s, we lost the House and the Senate for 60 years. So they're not only bad economically, they're bad politically.
Oh, Rand, baby, from your lips. David Jolly.
You know, one of those clips about hopefully this will fix things soon. I had the reaction, what is Donald Trump actually trying to fix? I mean, we have some of the tightest labor markets, historically speaking, that we have seen. And so what is it that he's trying to fix? And I think that's where he throws up these trial balloons of, well, we're going to start building things here. Listen, you start with the plan to build things here, and then you use tariffs as levers to get there. But I think what you're seeing from Republicans is they're really stuck. And you mentioned in the opener, you know, the results in the Florida special elections, the results in Wisconsin, all of this anxiety that's spilling out on the street, the town halls, the protests in the street, Democratic voters going to the Republican members of Congress's offices and saying, you know, we demand some changes. That's working. To see a 15-point swing and a 20-point swing in Republican districts in Florida, a lot of those Republicans you just saw there on the screen are terrified, because if you're a Republican House member right now who's in a 6 to 8 point district, it was safe the last 2 cycles. That's no longer safe. Byron Donalds, the leading candidate for the Republican nomination of governor of Florida, was just asked to defend Trump's decisions on tariffs, and he had to. But you can kind of feel when you see Ted Cruz, Byron Donalds, and others defending the tariffs, they're not convinced that what Donald Trump is doing right is right. But they got themselves in a corner where they have to defend the president. They're going to own this through next November. And if the special elections in Florida and the judicial election in Wisconsin are any indication, Republicans are digging themselves in a very deep hole that they may not be able to get themselves out of.
Michael, I could talk for 2 hours about all of this. You guys are all going to have to come back tomorrow to be continued. But I think it is so cataclysmic that this was Matt Gaetz's seat. Like nobody spent any money. This was like a ruby red district that swung. I think they swung 17 and 15 points. I think there are about 4 to 5 dozen seats that were decided by less than that. Rand Paul is absolutely correct to be talking about 50% of the seats. You know, I mean, the problem with no one really caring that the Republican Party stopped functioning as a political party, and then as a consequence, Congress stopped functioning as a separate branch of government, is that you now have a policy that will usher in the political death of the Republican brand, but also do an enormous amount of damage to the American family's purchasing power. How do you help the people that are going to suffer in that middle period? Even if the political price is one that is owed to the American people?
I mean, I think that is such an important question, and we should not lose sight of the fact that there are millions of American families today just very worried about their economic future. They are scared of what is happening. They are hurting. People are worried about losing their jobs. They're worried about prices going up. They're worried about losing their health care. And, you know, we can talk politics all day, but we have to remember at the end of underneath all of this is real people who are really, really suffering. And Donald Trump and his allies in Congress are making things worse. I cannot imagine a more toxic policy mix of cutting people's health care, raising their grocery costs, and then using that to pay for tax breaks for rich people. It is like designed in a lab to be politically toxic. And it's baffling to me from a political standpoint, but I love the question you asked, because we cannot lose sight of the fact that there are real people who are going to suffer from this over the next 18 months. And I really hope, I genuinely hope, that Republicans in Congress take a different tack here. They can. They know what happens when they try to take people's health care away and when they make things difficult for working people. They know what happens when they raise prices for everybody in America. They should take a different path here. They still can. It's not too late.
I mean, David Jolly, the crazy thing is that there is nothing conservative or Republican about this. It is economic destruction to service the ego and the vibes of Donald Trump, the man. It has nothing to do with the Republican brand as it's existed ever.
The tariffs announced by Donald Trump essentially equate to the largest tax increase we've seen in modern history. And that comes at the hands of a Republican president. And also, if you marshal it with the tax package they're about to pass through, you're talking about exploding the debt, exploding annual deficits in a way that all of those things, Nicole, when you used to be a down the line Republican, that was manna. That was what we talked about, was reducing debt and deficits, bringing down taxes. Donald Trump is the opposite of that. And in many ways, he crushed the traditional orthodoxy of republicanism. And the one thing he figured out was populism. Populism often works electorally, but it doesn't work in governing. And the way he has disrupted the Republican Party has created danger for us nationally. Obviously, we know that under Donald Trump's, his legacy is one of danger, but it's also dangerous for the Republican Party because they have so decided, okay, we have rebuilt our party in Donald Trump's image. We are all in. All our chips are on the table. And if this goes the way it's going, Donald Trump's not on the ballot again, but every other Republican is. Watch out.
So much of the last election was about purchasing power, the price of eggs, but more than eggs, feeling like people couldn't get ahead. Every American household's purchasing power will be greatly, suddenly, arbitrarily diminished imminently. What does that look like, and how do you think business will respond?
Well, I want to get to that, but I want to just go back for a second to try to understand Trump's rationale, because I think we've been talking a lot about how this doesn't make sense economically or politically, which I agree with that assessment very much. However, Trump won this election by his power of empathy, which is part of what makes him such a strong politician in very specific parts of the United States, where in parts of Pennsylvania and parts of Wisconsin, where there are voters who feel like globalization left them behind. And Trump came in with this promise that he was going to disrupt everything and deliver for those workers. And you see the most extreme version of what that disruption is playing out in these policies. So there are people, some domestic manufacturing associations that came out with statements in support of this policy. There are some voters with whom this policy may be popular. But I think it's misguided for the reason that you lay out in your question, that even if there's some manufacturing jobs created, and I think it will be a very small number, that does not outweigh the enormous harm it causes for the hundreds of millions of Americans who would not feel the impact of a particular plant opening in a particular district, for example. So there is a way that you can squint and understand at least the underlying political rationalism. And I think the point that was made earlier that populism makes sense politically, it just doesn't make sense economically. I think you see the huge gap between what was good politics for Trump's campaign and what actually is good policy in leadership opening up this week.
But even if you want to bring manufacturing back, every company that makes something here relies on an international supply chain.
It's nonsensical.
And so there's not a single thing that was made here in the past that isn't made here anymore, that doesn't rely on a foreign part or piece.
Absolutely. I was talking to a Midwestern manufacturer recently who would be the case study in the type of company that you'd want to have invest in response to this. And that person was deeply anxious about the prospect of tariffs and how it would affect the business. So I'm totally with you that as a policy, it doesn't make sense. But
automakers cannot build cars in America without parts from other. That's going to be a major disruption. So even if you have a pocket of people that he lied to or dangled this in front of, if those people think they're going to go work in a factory that's going to turn a switch on tomorrow and be able to sort of supply a chain of products to make anything, that is also destroyed by the tariff regime.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Trump sold people on the idea that he would come in as a savior type. And you see how empty that promise is now with the policies that were rolled out, in the market's reaction, and in the continued effects that we're going to see in the coming weeks and months as these tariffs start to take effect. And I will say, let's imagine that they get rolled back even. That back and forth uncertainty, will they persist? Will there be another tariff war? That is a chilling force in America's economy that serves neither American business nor the American consumer.
Nor our friends.
Nicole,
go ahead.
Nicole, can I I wanted to jump in and say, I think that you just made some really great points here, and I wanted to add that it's one thing to say we want to protect American jobs. We want to maybe use some tariffs to do that in targeted ways. But one question that people should ask is, what is he doing with the revenue that people are paying on these taxes on imported goods? Is he investing that back in manufacturing here in the United States? Is he giving it back to those same workers who've been left behind? No, they are spending it on tax breaks that mainly go to very wealthy people, and in some cases to corporations who are also shipping jobs overseas. The 2017 tax law, people don't talk about this enough, that he signed instituted a lower tax rate for profits overseas than here at home, and they want to double down on that. So I take a little bit of exception to the idea that he's governing as a populist. Yes, tariffs are very much at odds with traditional Republican orthodoxy, but massive tax breaks for people at the top is very much what's the opposite of at odds, at evens with traditional Republican orthodoxy. And he's using the revenue from these tariffs to pay for those tax breaks. I think there's going to be a lot of people who even were open to the idea of a tariff policy being pretty upset that that's what the money's being used for.